Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. If you find value in stories that blend human emotion with timeless wisdom, consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence here supports mindful content in a noisy world. Now, let us enter the story. They were the kind of couple that looked perfect on paper. Julia and Mark had been married for 12 years. They had met at a corporate leadership conference in Seattle, bonded over their mutual love for late-night jazz and mushroom risotto, and quickly spiraled into a whirlwind romance. Within a year, they were married. A house in the suburbs, 2 Labradors, curated vacations in Tuscany and Kyoto, and Instagram posts that looked like romance novel covers. Everyone envied them. But inside the walls of their meticulously designed home, Julia had begun to feel a hollowness she couldn't explain. It wasn't Mark, not exactly. He was kind, reliable, faithful, predictable, and maybe that was the problem. At 38, Julia found herself waking up in a life she had once chosen, but no longer felt alive in. She would sit at her kitchen island, stirring oat milk into her coffee, watching the sunrise pour gold across the marble countertops, and feel nothing. The discontent wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It whispered. Quiet, slow, steady erosion. Her escape came in the form of Lila, her yoga instructor turned confidant. Lila was everything Julia wasn't. Free-spirited, impulsive, and allergic to tradition. She spoke of Tantra like it was morning conversation, and believed that vows meant nothing if your soul was dying. "You're not cheating," Lila once told her, twirling her sage stick. "You're waking up." And then came Adrian, Layla's younger brother, a travel photographer with a crooked smile and eyes that seemed to see right through her. Their first meeting was accidental. A post-class lunch turned into 3 hours of laughter, philosophy, and stolen glances. She told herself nothing would happen, that it was just a spark, that she was allowed to feel something. Then came the texts, the late-night messages, the excuses to run errands, the first kiss in the back of his Jeep under a sky full of stars. By the time she crossed the line into physical intimacy, Julia had already rewritten the narrative in her head. Mark was safe. Adrian was fire. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She just wanted to feel awake again. But desires have consequences, even the ones dressed as freedom. Mark wasn't suspicious at first. He had grown so used to Julia's late-night yoga classes and weekend retreats that he barely noticed the shift. When she started locking her phone or laughing at messages she didn't show him, he chalked it up to just girl stuff. Her moods were sharper, her smiles more forced, but he attributed it to stress. It was a Wednesday night when it happened. Julia had left in a rush for a friend's birthday dinner. Mark had been searching for a PDF invoice on the family laptop when an iMessage popped up. "Adrian, still thinking about your mouth. Can't wait till Sunday." He stared at the screen, numb. The cursor blinked like a pulse. He didn't click anything, didn't scroll, didn't even breathe for a full minute. The world didn't explode. The earth didn't shake. But something in him broke. Still, he said nothing. At dinner that weekend, he poured her wine, asked about the yoga studio, listened as she talked about Lila's new retreat in Sedona. He nodded, smiled, and died a little. For the next week, Mark became a ghost with skin. He kissed her goodnight, packed her lunch, watered the plants, But his eyes were no longer present. He watched her laugh at her phone, saw the flicker of guilt she tried to bury, and said nothing. Until the night he couldn't pretend anymore. It was raining. She had just come home, soaked and radiant from whatever lie she'd lived that evening. He sat on the couch, hands clasped, voice quiet. "Who is Adrian?" She froze. The silence stretched. Then came the explosion. Tears. Accusations. Shouting. She blamed him for not being present, for not seeing her, for turning into a roommate. He shouted back, asking how many nights she'd lied, how many hours she spent in someone else's arms while calling their marriage sacred. They broke that night. Not just the vows, not just the illusion. They shattered the entire story of who they thought they were together. Julia left 2 days later. She'd packed a single bag, told Mark she needed space to think, and drove 6 hours north to Lila's off-grid cabin in the mountains. No cell signal, no distractions, just trees, wind, and her own chaos. At first, she cried. Then she raged. Then she scrolled through old photos of Mark's birthdays, beach trips, their wedding dance. She alternated between missing him and feeling disgusted by his emotional numbness. In truth, she didn't know what she wanted. Lila arrived the next day with kombucha and incense. "You did what your soul needed," she said, lighting sage. "Don't fall into shame. Shame is a cage." But Julia wasn't ashamed. Not exactly. She was confused. It was on the 3rd morning, after a silent breakfast and a long hike, that she met the monk. He was sitting under a pine tree near the trail, eyes closed, hands resting gently on his knees. Robes faded, sandals covered in dust. He looked like a misplaced ghost from another era. She paused. Something about his stillness invited her chaos. Without thinking, she sat down a few feet away. He didn't look at her, didn't move. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, he said, "If no self exists, who cheats?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" His eyes stayed closed. A question, not an answer. She gave a half-laugh, annoyed. "I'm not in the mood for riddles. Cones are not riddles. They are keys. Sometimes they unlock the lock. Sometimes they reveal there is no lock at all." She stood, dusted off her pants. "I've had enough of men telling me who I am." But as she walked away, the words followed her. "If no self exists, who cheats?" That night, she didn't sleep. Her mind turned the question over like a stone in her hand. She remembered her father's betrayal when she was 12, her first boyfriend cheating on her in college, the way she always swore she'd never be that woman, the story she told herself, loyal, grounded, good. But the truth? She wasn't chasing Adrian. She was fleeing Julia, the version of herself trapped in performance, in roles, in expectations. The version who smiled when she was exhausted, who hosted dinner parties when she wanted to scream, who called herself happy when she was drowning. She hadn't cheated because she didn't love Mark. She had cheated because she didn't know how to tell the truth. Mark didn't chase her. When Julia left, he let her, not out of indifference, but because he couldn't imagine pretending anymore. The house felt like a museum, every object echoing their life together, now irrelevant. He moved through the days mechanically, toast, emails, walking the dogs. But something had cracked open. Grief poured in, yes, but so did space. On a random night, he sat in their bedroom, surrounded by silence, and Googled, "How do you survive betrayal without becoming bitter?" Among the endless blogs and therapy ads, a link stood out. The way out is not through blame, but through seeing. Zen Master Sun San. He clicked. One article turned into 5, then into a book, then into a podcast. At first it was distraction. Then it became inquiry. He remembered how Julia once joked that his obsession with order made him boring. She wasn't wrong. He had become someone who equated control with love. Fixing the sink on time, folding the laundry just right, showing up always but never asking why. Meditation entered his life not as a practice, but as necessity. At first, he sat for 2 minutes, then 10, then an hour. He didn't chant, didn't pray. He just breathed. And in the quiet, memories came. He remembered the first time Julia cried after sex and said she didn't know why. He remembered ignoring it, pulling her close, saying it was okay. But he never asked, never pressed, just smoothed over every bump like a good man should. But good men can also be blind. And now, as he sat cross-legged on their woven rug, the old Mark began to dissolve. He began to understand that betrayal didn't happen to him. It happened through them. Julia's affair wasn't a single action. It was a culmination of 100 unsaid things, 1,000 swallowed emotions, a life carefully arranged to look like love. And yet, in his stillness, he didn't feel hatred. He felt sadness, and under that something unexpected, compassion, not for Julia alone, but for himself too. 6 months passed. They hadn't spoken. Julia remained upstate, taking odd jobs at wellness retreats, journaling obsessively, and slowly learning that healing wasn't a path upward, it was a spiral. Some days she wept over Mark's absence. Other days she convinced herself they had only been clinging to a dead dream. Mark, meanwhile, stayed put. He didn't date. He didn't post anything online. He just lived, quietly, a little more aware, a little less armored. Meditation had become routine, not ritual. He still missed her, but the missing no longer felt like needing. And then one day, a short email arrived. Subject: if you're open, body, I'd like to see you. No expectations, just presence. He didn't overthink. He said yes. They met at a small tea room halfway between both their worlds. No lawyers, no papers, just two people who had once loved each other trying to meet in a new way. Julia had cut her hair. Mark had grown a beard. They both looked older, softer. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Then Julia smiled, half sad. I thought I was searching for freedom, but I was just running. Mark nodded. And I thought I was loving you, when I was actually managing you. They laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was finally true. Over the next 2 hours, they talked not about blame, but about impermanence, about how desire left unchecked becomes hunger, and how identity, when defended too fiercely, becomes a prison. Julia mentioned the monk, the Koan. Mark tilted his head. If no self exists, who cheats? They both sat with it. He whispered, maybe the one who cheats. is also the one who's trying to be found. They didn't reconcile. They didn't declare closure. They just saw each other as people, not roles. When they stood to leave, Julia touched his hand briefly. "Thank you," she said, "for not holding me hostage to who I was." He smiled. "Thank you for destroying the lie I didn't know I was living." And just like that, they walked away not as lovers, not as enemies, but as witnesses to each other's becoming. Betrayal is real. It breaks hearts, shatters illusions, and reshapes lives. But what we call betrayal often has less to do with the act itself, and more to do with the identity we've built around being safe, being chosen, being enough. From a Buddhist perspective, suffering arises not from events, but from clinging. We cling to roles. I'm the loyal wife. I'm the good husband. We cling to stories that promised forever. I gave everything. We cling to illusions. Love should protect me from pain. But nothing in samsara is permanent. Not even love. So what do we do when the person we trusted most becomes the person who hurt us? Here are 6 Buddhist ways to work through betrayal. 1. Name the illusion. Release the story you clung to. 2. Sit with pain. Let pain exist without mental commentary. 3. Practice Tonglen. Breathe in suffering, breathe out compassion. 4. Use koans, let paradox dissolve ego. 5. Don't rewrite the past, let it stay messy. 6. Anchor in presence. Healing lives in the now. If this story touched something within you, share it with someone who may need it too. Subscribe for more narratives where ancient wisdom meets the struggles of modern life. And remember, sometimes the greatest clarity comes after we lose everything we thought mattered.